If you're anything like me, your writing projects are absolutely precious. You may have spent a year or two, or maybe even 3, working on the same book without ever showing it to anyone. Maybe you dream about recruiting a critique partner or beta reader one day, but the voices in your head just won't agree with each other. Not yet, it's not ready. It's ready for feedback. It's never gonna be good unless you get feedback on it. But it's our secret. No one else but us can read it. For the past few months, I've been revising the fantasy novel I referred to as Project Sight after getting beta reader feedback on it for the first time ever, and I'm here to tell you it is absolutely worth it. And also to share some lessons I learned along the way so you don't repeat the same mistakes I did. We are going to be discussing how I prepared for the round of beta reading, what I did during the process, and how I handled the feedback after getting it. For each of these sections, I will be telling you what I think I did well and what I think I could have done differently. So before actually sending anything to anyone, I divided my draft up into 9 equal parts and then wrote up some questions at the end of each part for people to answer. Now all of that is fairly standard, but one thing I think I did particularly well is I was actually keeping an ongoing list of questions to ask to my readers months ahead of actually sending anything out. So anytime during revisions, if I became stuck on a problem where I wasn't quite sure if something was working or not, I would make a note of that and then I compiled that all into the questionnaires as I needed it when I eventually sent the draft out. And this is something I only actually started doing later on in the revision process. The first few sections I didn't do that for. And I think I would have really benefited from doing this earlier on in the process. I think it made a big difference in how detailed and useful the beta reader feedback was from where I did that to where I didn't. And something else I did for those later sections is actually not limit myself to only having questions on the questionnaires at the end, but I added some questions after certain chapters where I needed them to, and the feedback I got from those was really useful as well. I think another thing that went well is I did a full line edit and copy edit pass through the entire draft before sending it to anyone. And obviously I knew that sections were gonna change, chapters were gonna get scratched or moved around, but it didn't feel like a waste of time doing this because it makes it a lot less distracting to the person reading it if the writing is on a higher level, and that way they can focus on the actual developmental issues as opposed to correcting typos all the time. Not to mention, line editing is kind of a difficult skill to learn as a writer because it takes you quite a lot of drafts before you get to the point where it's actually worth doing a line edit, and as such you don't get to practice it as often as you maybe should. So I think doing like a minor sort of quick line edit before sending a draft to beta readers is very useful for practice as well as being good for your beta readers. The third thing that I think went well is I gave each of my beta readers a breakdown of how many sections there are in the book and how long each section is before they even started reading, and a lot of people told me that they appreciated that and found it helpful to plan around. There's quite a lot of things I think I could have done to prepare better, but I think the main one is narrowing down my focus. This was my first time having anyone other than my boyfriend read something that I'd written, and I was very excited. I wanted to get all the feedback about all of the different things, and I think I went a little bit overboard. So this is part of the email I sent my readers to begin with. As you can see, I was asking about world building, confusion, plot, pacing, characters, and even white room syndrome, which is technically a line editing thing. And this was just what I wanted them to keep in mind while reading and leave inline comments. I also had the questions at the end of each section which were different from this. Now all of this is information I actually wanted. However, I think I was asking for too much all in one go, and it would have been better for me to ask for a couple of things to bear in mind while they're reading so that they can focus their attention on that one thing, and then do a second beta round later on in the process where they focus on a different thing. For example, I think pacing is something I'm still struggling with, so if I were to do a second round of beta readers, I would tell them, hey, please pay attention to the pacing as you're reading and tell me where it feels off, and that'd be it. Just that one question and maybe some extra questions at the end. And obviously this is going to give me less information than asking about a billion things, but I think the depth of the comments is going to be better as a result, so this is what I will be trying next time. The second thing I think I should have done better is the way I structured my questions. And this is a bit of a funny one. I am just going to show you how this was done in the first section so you can laugh at my naive approach. So at the end of every question, I gave beta readers an indication of how long I wanted their answers to be, be it a couple of sentences to a couple of paragraphs. And looking back at this does make it look like an exam paper, which is not the vibes you want to be giving someone when they're doing free labor for you effectively. And I should mention, no one outright told me that they didn't like this, but like, I could tell. But this was coming from a good place. I was trying to keep in mind that my readers have lives of their own and they're busy, so I wanted to make it clear which questions I wanted more in-depth answers to and which questions they could get away with just a single sentence because I was just looking for like a quick answer. I just don't think I formatted this in a way that made that nice to look at. I'm thinking for future rounds what I might try to do to have the same effect but make it less exam papery is have multiple choice questions or like yes or no questions. Yes, that also makes it sound like an exam, but like, if you have any better ideas, please let me know. An obvious way to fix this would just be ask less questions, but we all know that's not gonna happen, is it? And then the final thing that I think I kinda screwed up were my timings and deadlines. Now bear in mind here, when you ask someone to beta read for you, they're basically doing a job for you for free. So even if there's like this implicit trade going on where you might beta read for them in the future, maybe you've done it in the past, they're doing work for you for free. So bearing this in mind, I think there are two things where I went wrong with this. The first one being, I finished this draft in late October and I was very excited, so I wanted to send it to people immediately. Now, if you're a regular member of the writing community, you might have already guessed why that's a bad idea. Most writers do not have time to beta read other people's books in late October to November. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two was being aware of that fact and therefore giving people a really far away deadline to account for that. So my book went out to people towards the middle of October and I gave them the deadline of finishing it by the end of the year, but I actually put down in my email, hey, don't worry if it takes you longer. So just to be clear here, my beta readers have done absolutely nothing wrong. I am so grateful for them for reading the book and giving me really useful feedback. This is entirely on me messing up my timings and I'm only telling you so you can maybe keep it in mind and not make the same mistakes as I did. But what these two mistakes resulted in was effectively that one person went through the book really quickly to finish it before November, and then the other two people finished reading it in March and April. That is a 6-month gap between the first person reading it and the final person reading it, which would be absolutely fine. I was working on a different book at the time anyway, so it's not like I was waiting on feedback. The main issue is that I was kind of hoping to do a roundtable discussion sort of situation, and with 6 months between the first person and the final person, it just didn't seem like I could get everyone in a group to discuss the book on the same level. Like the first person might have had to reread it at that point, and it just didn't seem worth doing anymore. So I think if I were to do something like this again, what I would do is I would set a deadline. I would not send books out in October, first of all, but I would tell people, hey, I want to do a roundtable discussion. I would like to do it on this date. If you finish the book by that date, it would be great to have you. If not, you can always submit your feedback later, and that's also fine. And that way people have a deadline that's a bit more real that they can use for accountability if they choose to, but it's also not too demanding because I'm giving them the option of finishing it later. Maybe I'm just not very good at asking for favors, who knows, but I think that approach is going to work better than what I did last time. So next up we're going to be talking about what I was actually doing while people were in the process of reading the book. And I had to scrape my brain a little bit here because I could not come up with things that I actually did well. But we'll get into the bad stuff afterwards, shall we? One thing I can say that I did well was I was very responsive. Because I sent my book out in 9 different sections and people were only receiving the next section as they completed previous sections, I paid a lot of attention to my messages during that time, to my emails during that time, and whenever someone asked for the next section, I was very quick at getting it to them. Now, the other thing that I did well is kind of a cheat because I do not think I did it well, but I did it better for the second and third beta reader than for the first one, so I'm gonna give it to myself. And that is that while I was receiving feedback for those 2 readers, I was working on a different project, and that project was holding my attention a little bit, so I was less focused on some of the comments I was getting, and I was a bit more separated from the project at the time. Now, putting some distance between myself and the project is number one on the list of things that I think I should have done better, especially with the first beta reader. So my first beta reader was very regular at always reading the book at around the same time and leaving feedback at around the same time every single day, and it got to the point where I was basically sitting there refreshing my emails, waiting to see that email with a bunch of comments, because I was craving that dopamine of reading the comments, seeing what they thought of the book, and it was not healthy, let me tell you. At that point, I hadn't even started another writing project yet, and I was very attached to that first book, and a lot of the feedback I got was actually very positive, so it's not like I was sitting there feeling sorry for myself or anything. I was just waiting for the feedback at all times. I was thinking about very little else. So I think the way I will address this problem in the future is giving myself at least 2 weeks between finishing a draft and sending it to anyone. I also think it'd be helpful to make sure I'm working on another project while people are reading the book, and most importantly, turn off the damn notifications. Please, I'm begging you. So because of this timings issue that I mentioned, it had been quite a while since I'd last read the draft when I finally had all the feedback together. So the first thing that I did was actually read through the entire draft myself and leave myself notes and feedback like I would if I was beta reading for someone else. And then only after I'd done that, I went through everyone else's feedback. But I think that went very well. I didn't leave that much space between drafts on purpose, but it was certainly very helpful to have it. And then I was also very happy with how I actually organized and implemented the feedback. What I did is starting with the bigger comments, the things that affected multiple chapters or multiple sections, and I took those out of the document and made a separate list. And once I was done with that list, I went back to the draft while looking at the beta reader documents with all of the inline comments again, and I was able to tackle all of the smaller issues in that pass. There are actually still some comments that I haven't tackled, and that is both because there's a couple that I disagree with but feel like I should implement, but also feel like I might want another opinion, and there's some that I just straight up don't know how to fix. And I've been keeping a list of those outstanding issues so that I can use them as questions for my next beta round. As for what I would do differently, I'm gonna go with timings. Again. Now, I mentioned that there was 6 months between my first beta reader and my final beta reader. What I didn't mention is that there was an additional 8 months between my final beta reader and me going back through the beta reading comments. Now, the long story short for that is I am not very good at working on multiple things at the same time. I wanted to finish my existing project, and my existing project took longer than I was expecting. However, I think I should have taken the time of just stopping that project and getting back to beta readers quicker, because once I started going through those comments and trying to address them, I had questions, and my beta readers did not remember what on earth they put on my draft. They barely remembered the story itself. And then the other thing I would do differently is the reading order in which I went through comments. So the way I did things is I went through the entire book worth of comments from one beta reader, and then I did the entire book's worth of comments from a different beta reader, and then the third beta reader after that. That was not a smart move. And in hindsight, that is very obvious, but at the time, I just completely did not pick up on it. When I was going through the first beta reader's comments, the positive comments were nice to read and fun to have, but I basically largely ignored them. And then I went on to look at the second beta reader's comments, and I started noticing that some of the positive feedback they left disagreed with the negative feedback that beta reader number 1 had left. So because I had written down all the negative comments, I was able to pick up on that, but the positive comments left by beta reader number 1 were not captured anywhere, so there's a chance that the other way around also happened and I don't have a record of it. So if I were to do this again, I would treat the beta round more as one whole thing as opposed to 3 different pieces of feedback, and I would start by looking at section 1 from every one of my beta readers and then move on to section 2 from every one of my beta readers as opposed to one reader at a time for the whole book. I think that would allow me to cross-reference a lot better and get more information out of the feedback that I got. So that was a lot of information very fast, but if there's 3 things I want you to take away from this video, they are Make sure you're thinking about your questions and keeping track of them as you work on revisions. Do not ask too many questions in one go and keep your focus narrowed down. And for the love of God, do not send a book out to beta readers right before November. Trust me, you'll thank me for it. I told you I was ready for feedback. Thank you so much for watching. If you've ever had your book beta read by anyone or critiqued by anyone, I would love to know all about it and how you found the experience, and I will see you next time. Bye bye. No, it's not ready yet. That was too much, wasn't it?